Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me. My name is Caroline, and this is the Catholic Audio Bible Reading Series here on YouTube, where I read from the Catholic Bible and provide some commentary, a little bit of Bible study, some reflections. In this video series, we have been working on the book of Genesis, and we are now finished reading through the book of Genesis. And so I'm doing this Bible recap of everything we've read thus far so that we can finish off June and start fresh with the book of Exodus in July. I realize that I have some other video series that are being published out onto YouTube. Number one of those is the top 5 things that I learn as I read, small bits and pieces throughout the book of Genesis. That is, a 1 or 2 chapters each time. And those are the top 5 most important things from those chapters, which I hope that you will catch here on YouTube. And I'll post the links in the description so you can see those. It gives you a real high-level summary of the most important things from each of those chapters in Genesis. And then I also have my daily podcast, which is called Catholic Bible Daily Reflections. And in that podcast, we're up to episode 4, which was just released today. I'll put a link in the description to that podcast, but that is more commentary. We're not reading the Bible. We're just talking about whatever chapters it happens to be. We're in Genesis, of course, and then comparing those Bible verses and chapters to daily life. And so, again, I'll put those in the description, but this is just a recap of all of the book of Genesis. And then again, we'll start with Exodus in our next audio Bible video. So with that, I'll just give you the key takeaways. Genesis is the beginning of all beginnings. It's the beginning of creation. It's the beginning of mankind and humanity. It's also the beginning of sin. It's the beginning of God's relationship, his covenant with mankind, and specifically the Israelites. With Abraham and all of his descendants, the unfolding plan of salvation after sin and the devil come into the world. We see, despite human failures, that God's faithfulness never ends, and God's love never ends. God's love is with us from the very beginning. And then his promises continue from generation to generation. So we'll go ahead and just kind of talk about each of those items, those takeaways in a little more detail. So we start at the very beginning where God creates the universe. He creates the earth, the sky, the sun, the moon, the sea, land. He creates all creatures of every kind. And then on day 6, he creates man. He creates Adam, and then later creates Eve. He takes a rib from Adam and puts it into Eve. And when Adam sees Eve, he immediately says, "This is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh." From the very beginning, God intended man and woman to become man and wife. There's a very famous, important quote, Bible verse there where we say that today in our wedding ceremonies. Therefore a man shall leave his mother and father and cling to his wife, and they become from 2 to 1 flesh. That is how covenant and kingdom marriages were meant to be from the very beginning. One woman, one man, the two become one, and in the middle, in the center, is God. God created humanity and mankind in his own image. He created man and woman in his own image, and that is why we have dignity. That is why we're unique. We are unique right down to our very fingerprints, the hairs on our head, which we learn later, of course, and God says he has numbered every hair on our head, is because we are in his image. And I mentioned how God obviously created us on the sixth day, but on the seventh day, God rested. God created what he called the Sabbath on the seventh day, where God did work for 6 days, and on the seventh, he rested. He hallowed that day, he blessed that day, and that was not created for God. I mean, God didn't need rest. He created that for mankind and humanity. It, number one, shows God's love for us from the very beginning and his caring for us. It also shows that God, cares that we rest. He cares that while hard work is important, that we are getting a day to bless that day, to do things in community with each other and with God. God wanted a community. That's the second point. God wanted communion with his creation. He made us in his own image. He loved us from the very beginning. He gave us rest. He gave all of creation, right? Everything that you see on this earth is so important because God created it. It's why we care about the environment. It's why we care about all living things, because God created it in the very beginning. So we also see the beginning of the Holy Trinity. It's not spelled out in the Bible. It's one of the greatest mysteries for us Catholics. We have where there's references to God in three persons, because there's things like we've created God in our image, and that man would partake of the tree of life and become like us. So we start to see where God refers to himself as an us, a we, an our. There is nowhere in the Bible where it specifically mentions the Holy Trinity. It is a mystery that we believe and have faith in. But it starts right in Genesis. We read in Genesis about the fall. That is the disobedience and the lack of trust that Adam and Eve had for God. God told Adam and Eve, eat of anything here in the Garden of Eden except for one tree, and that was the tree of knowledge, the tree of good and evil. And Eve is tempted, and she's tempted to eat of the fruit from the serpent, who is the devil, and she eats the fruit and gives the fruit to Adam. They both eat of it, and then their eyes are open. They realize good and evil. They see their nakedness, and they cover themselves. And then God is walking into the garden. He's walking in the garden, and they have hidden themselves from him. They tell him, God, what they had done, and God in his you can say anger, you can say out of justice, he has thrown Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden. He closes off the Garden of Eden with cherubim, with fiery cherubim, so that they can never re-enter the Garden of Eden again. And this is the beginning of God's plan and promise to reconcile mankind back to himself, because God's ultimate goal in creation, again, is to have communion with his creation, to be in communion with his creation. And so that's the beginning of the plan. He sends Adam and Eve out, and as punishment, he greatly increases women's labor pains. That's one of the most unfortunate, being a mother myself, I will say. He also gives to mankind that they must toil for their food. They have to work the land. I think it says thorns and thistles will sprout up, and you will need to work the land for your food all the days of your life. He God also says very famously, importantly, he says, to dust, in dust you were made, and dust you shall return. We say that when we receive ashes at the beginning of Lent every year, Ash Wednesday. That is where that came from in the book of Genesis. We say, to dust you shall return. We see that the devil has now entered the world because of Eve's no to God and Adam and Eve's lack of trust in God. They have let in the devil into the world. They have let in original sin. We are all born with original sin. And we see that now that the devil is let out into the world, that evil has been let out into the world, and it greatly increases over time in Genesis. We see that Cain, who is the son of Adam and Eve, murders Abel, his brother, also a son of Adam and Eve. That is the very first murder that was committed on the earth. And we see that Cain is now marked by God, and he's marked by God, but he has descendants. He marries, he has descendants. No one can kill him because God would severely punish anyone that tried to murder Cain. Cain's descendants goes off in one direction, right? And some would say more of an evil direction. And then Adam and Eve have another son granted by God, that is Seth. And that is another direction of descendants, another lineage of descendants, but a good direction. And we will see it's not Cain's line that leads to humanity's reconciliation with God. It is Seth and Adam's line through Seth that leads to God's salvation and God's reconciliation back to himself. Seth leads to Noah, leads to Abraham, leads to David, leads to Jesus Christ, our ultimate Lord and Savior of this world. And so we see that Seth, his descendants include Noah, and Noah is a righteous man, finds favor with God in a world where increasing violence and evil are just going across the earth. And so Noah finds favor with God, but because of the growing increase in evil, God becomes more dismayed, more grievous at his creation. It was so evil that he tells Noah, he devises a plan and he tells Noah, I am to the point of just grievousness of my creation. And this is great disobedience and great wickedness in the world. And so God tells Noah that he has a plan to destroy the earth and all of creation, but he will save Noah. And he gives Noah a plan, instructions, specific instructions to build the ark. And Noah follows God's instructions completely. God patiently, and again, this is God's faithfulness and his love for us. He is patient, and he waits for Noah to complete the ark. And God puts Noah and his family into the ark, and male and female pairs of all other creation. So every moving thing, every living creature on the earth was also brought into the ark by Noah, and God seals Noah and all of this other creation in the ark, and then it rains. We see the flood. We see that it rains for 40 days and 40 nights, and it covers the earth all the way over the mountains, and creation has been killed off, other than who is in the ark. We do see that some of the Nephilim, which is these are the giants. Some did survive because we see them referenced later after the book of Genesis in the Bible. It's who David obviously kills. He kills a giant. But they live for some reason. They were able to survive. And The Nephilim were mentioned in Genesis, how they were fallen angels from God. They were kicked out of heaven. They fell to the earth after they disobeyed God and said they would not serve. And they took wives of mortal human women. They had sons and daughters, and they were huge giants called the Nephilim. So we'll see the Nephilim mentioned later in the Bible, but for the most part, the entirety of the earth was destroyed. The water had receded days later, and then Noah was able to leave the ark once all the water had receded, and he had tested out by sending out a raven, and he sent out a dove. The dove did return with an olive branch in its mouth, so he knew that it was safe to leave the ark. And then he waited some additional days, and then he left the ark. And then he makes a sacrifice with the clean animals that he had set aside in the ark for that purpose. He set aside these clean animals, made sacrifice to God on an altar. God was greatly pleased at the sacrifice, and he tells Noah, he promises Noah, he says, "This is the promise that I'm making with all of my creation, that I will never again bring a flood to destroy the earth. The earth will have its seasons, it will have its days, and it will have its times. Never again will I destroy creation that I have made." And we see also that God establishes a covenant with Noah, and he seals that covenant with a rainbow. So every time you see a rainbow on the earth now, it is a sign to God that for him to remember his covenant with mankind. No more floods. Of course, there still will be chastisement across the world and across the earth, but not a flood again, the rainbow. So I know that there are some that have hijacked the rainbow to mean other things, but in the beginning and throughout all of time, the rainbow is a symbol, a sign of God's covenant with mankind. We see the Tower of Babel mentioned in Genesis, and man's pride, the human pride. They built this tower. They wanted it to be so tall that it would reach heaven, that they would be equal with God. And God saw this, and he threw mankind, he threw them across the earth and confused their language, gave them all different languages so they couldn't all understand each other. It was called Babel, because it was there that God dispersed mankind and confused their languages. It's also the story today, right? And looking back in our history as to why people were able to populate the whole earth and with different languages. So we see later that, again, in Seth's line, Abraham, called Abram at the beginning, he was later renamed Abraham. And on this line, this good line, this righteous line, right? We had Cain's line and we have Seth's line. And we see Abram, later called Abraham, who God speaks to him and tells him, leave your homeland, take your wife Sarai, who later becomes Sarah, and go to the land that I will show you. And Abraham, in great faith, he leaves. He does not know where he is going, but in great faith, he goes with a promise that God will bless all nations through him. We see that God establishes a covenant with Abraham, tells him he will have descendants as numerous as the stars and as numerous as the sands of the earth, so that you can't count them. And over a long period of time, there was a long period of waiting, but Abraham had great faith and he waited, and he and Sarah gave birth to Isaac in their old age. And Isaac is the heir, the descendant through which God's covenant would continue. The covenant is sealed through circumcision. We have circumcision through today, where back then a male baby, was circumcised on the 8th day after its birth. I'm not exactly sure if that continues today, if it's in the 8th day or immediately in the hospital when a baby is born. I can't remember. But in those days, it was on the 8th day after birth. But circumcision does continue today. And this seals the covenant that God had with Abraham and Sarah. And we, as Catholics, are adopted children of Abraham. So this brings us into the covenant with God. And it all started back with Genesis. We see that God tests Abraham with his son Isaac. He tells him, I want you to make a sacrifice of your son. And Abraham, in his great faith, did do that. He goes up to the mountaintop and he builds the altar, and Isaac says, Father, we have the wood, we have, we have the altar, but where is the sacrifice? And Abraham says, God will provide. And he is about to kill his son, and God's angel catches him right in the very last moment and says, do not harm your son. I now see that you have great faith in God. And Abraham then becomes the father of many nations. He said yes to God and followed him faithfully. We see that God also tells Abraham that he will destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham asks God, you're a God of justice. How would you would you destroy the cities if there were 50 righteous men, and then 40, then 30, and then down to 10? Would you destroy these cities if there were only 10 righteous men? And God says to Abraham, for the sake of the 10, I would not destroy the cities. God sends his two angels to Sodom and Gomorrah to test the cities. He finds that there's not even 10 righteous men there, but Abraham's nephew Lot and his wife and family do live in Sodom and Gomorrah. So for Abraham's sake, God rescues Lot and tells Lot and his wife and family to flee from Sodom and Gomorrah because the cities will be destroyed. Now, God also tells them, as they're fleeing, do not look back on the city of sin. And they are running forward, and Lot's wife, I was going to say Sarah, but Lot's wife is not named in Genesis or ever in the Bible. But Lot's wife turns back, and in her disobedience, God turns her into a pillar of salt. And we see Lot flees into the hills, and he's never going to see Abraham ever again. We see that Isaac, now an adult, son of Abraham and Sarah, marries Rebekah, and that continues this line of and the covenant with God. We see that Rebekah has twins, and Esau is the older, and Jacob is the younger. Now, when Esau and Jacob came out of the womb, Jacob was clinging to the heel of Esau, and Rebekah had heard from God because she was in such turmoil in her womb. God said to Rebekah, you have two great nations contained within you, but the older will serve the younger. And so that becomes important because later, because there is the birthright, there is the blessing that a father gives to their son, and usually it's to the elder, the firstborn. And what Jacob does, he connives a bit, and Rebekah connives a little bit. So Jacob was making some food one day, and Esau comes in and says, give me that food, I'm going to die, I'm starving, I'm so hungry. And Jacob says, sell me your birthright. and first, before I give you food. And Esau very foolishly says, what have I need for a birthright if I will die? So he sells his birthright to Jacob foolishly for a bowl of red bean food, and they later call him Edom because of that red food. But you will see interchangeably in the Bible, Esau and Edom, they are the same person and the same tribe. But later when so that was Jacob's conniving. Later, Rebekah connives because Isaac is very old and he will die soon, and he wants to give his blessing to his oldest son Esau. But Rebekah sends, Esau's out, and he's getting some game meat so that he can later go in to his father, so that his father can eat this food and then bless him. Rebekah then, while Esau's away, gets Jacob and says, I'm going to prepare this food. I want you to take this in to your father and get the blessing. And she puts the skin from an animal onto him because Esau was a hairy man. And she sends him in there with the food. And then Isaac, because he can't see very well, he feels the skin. He smells the clothing on him and believes it to be Esau. He eats the game food. He blesses Jacob. So he gives him the entirety of a blessing. And then Esau comes in and later and realizes that his blessing has now been lost, and he begs his father for his blessing. But Isaac says, no, you will now serve your brother. Your brother has deceived you, and he has his full blessing. And so Jacob, seeing that Esau wanted to kill him, Rebekah hears of it and tells Jacob. They come up with another plan together that Rebekah would send Jacob away to go to her brother Laban to find a wife from amongst their peoples. And they tell Isaac of this. Isaac sends him away with love and says, go and find a wife from among our people, not from the Canaanites, because they're living in the land of Canaan at the time. And so Jacob flees so his brother can't kill him, and he looks for a wife. And then Esau marries Ishmael's daughter because he wanted to please his father. And so we see them leave off with Jacob fleeing to Laban, Rebekah's brother. We see Esau staying with his father and with his wives, because now at this point Esau has multiple wives. So we see also that Jacob, as he's fleeing, he goes to Laban and he sees Laban's daughter Rachel, whom he just fell in love with at first sight. He wanted to marry her immediately. And Laban says, what will you give me if I give you my daughter Rachel's hand in marriage? And he says, I will work for you for 7 years. And so we see Jacob working for Laban for 7 years, tending his sheep, his flocks. And at the end of the 7 years, Laban tricks Jacob. He sends in his oldest daughter, Leah, not Rachel. And in the morning, he sees it was Leah and not Rachel. And he approaches Laban and says, what have you done to me? And Laban says, it's not our custom to marry off the younger before the older. Keep the older, and then I'll give you the younger if you serve me for another 7 years. And so he agrees. He keeps Leah. She, of course, gives birth. She's very fruitful. God has opened up her womb, and he closes the womb of Rachel. But Jacob works for Laban for another 7 years, so 14 years in total. And Leah has several sons. Rachel, seeing that that she's not able to give birth, she gives her maid to Jacob to marry, and so that when she has sons, that they will be considered Rachel's sons, although they are the servant woman. Leah sees this, and she also gives her servant girl to Jacob to marry, and to give birth to additional sons. She has more children. And so all in all, you have in total from Jacob and these 4 wives, 12 sons and 1 daughter, Dinah. We don't see Dinah referenced very much in the Bible because she has a very tragic history in that she was taken by a Canaanite man and raped, and the brothers exact revenge on those Canaanites in Shechem, and this was greatly to the dismay of Jacob. And it is just before Jacob leaves with his entire family at God's direction to go back to his homeland, to go back to his father Isaac. But Dinah is not referenced really after that, after this unfortunate event. There are some scholars that say that that Dinah might have had a son. Some say from Simeon, one of her brothers, but some say that she had a child born after with that Canaanite man, Shechem, and the child was then taken to Egypt. And so it's not clear in the Bible. It's not clear. There's no definitive storyline in the Bible after that, that vengeance from the brothers. And so we see at this point Jacob with 4 wives, and he is getting ready to go back to his homeland so that he can be with his father before his father dies. So we're about at the halfway point of this video, and I am going to continue with the recap of Genesis in a part 2, which will be tomorrow. But I just wanted to kind of get us to this point where we are now with Jacob, and we will see the rest of his storyline because there's so much more to come. And like I said, we're halfway through the point of Genesis, the book of Genesis. And so it seems fitting to kind of end it here and restart again tomorrow with the rest of this recap and finish it. And then we will officially be done with the book of Genesis and able to start the book of Exodus fresh in July. If you have any comments, feedback, prayer intentions, please feel free to leave those in the comments. And I do look at all comments. I try to reply to everything. And I hope that also that you will join us again for part 2 of this recap. And we can finish out and close out Genesis together. Have a good rest of your day.